On June 9, 2026, the commander of United States Naval Forces Central Command stood at a podium in Bahrain and assured the assembled press that American assets in the Persian Gulf remain fully defended and operationally ready. Hold on to that phrase, because intelligence assas because and Charlesmain intelligence assessments reviewed by Reuters and the Wall Street Journal in the same 72-hour window indicated that Iran had successfully mapped in granular operational detail the precise radar coverage gaps in America's Gulf-based air defense network. Gaps wide enough, according to the same assessments, to allow low observable cruise missiles to penetrate without triggering intercept protocols. Fully defended. And simultaneously, the single point of failure in that defense had been identified, cataloged, and reportedly shared with Iranian proxy forces in Iraq and Yemen. These two things cannot both be true. And today, I am going to show you which one is the lie. Right now, CNN is focused on the diplomatic backchannel between Washington and Tehran over the nuclear file. Fox News is asking whether Iran is preparing another drone swarm attack like October 2023. The BBC is running analysis of Iranian domestic politics, and whether the hardliners are gaining ground over the pragmatists. These are all legitimate questions. They are also completely the wrong frame for understanding what actually happened this week. The right determines whether American forces in the Gulf are genuinely safe or genuinely exposed is this: has America's Gulf air defense system developed a structural single point of failure, and has Iran found it? In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what that failure point is, how Iran identified it, why fixing it is more complicated than any official will admit publicly, and who benefits from the fact that this conversation is not happening at the scale it deserves. The framework I want to use to understand this is what military planners call the Integrated Air Defense System problem, or IADS, and specifically the concept of seam exploitation. Let me explain this from first principles, because it is simpler than the jargon makes it sound. A modern air defense network is not a single system. It is a mosaic of overlapping sensors, radars, satellites, signals intelligence, and overlapping interceptors, Patriot batteries, THAAD systems, shipborne SM-6 missiles. All network together to create a dome of protection. The theory is that the overlaps compensate for any individual system's limitations. If your Patriot battery has a gap in its coverage at low altitude, your ship-based radar catches it. If your ship-based radar has a dead zone behind a geographic feature, your satellite fills in. The network is supposed to be more resilient than any single node. The IADS is designed, in other words, with the explicit assumption that there is no single point of failure, and that assumption is precisely what Iran has spent the last 8 years systematically testing, probing, and disproving. The historical anchor here is not ancient. It is 2019. On September 14th, 2019, Iran, through Houthi proxies in Yemen, though the attack originated from Iranian territory, according to subsequent US and Saudi assessments, struck the Abqaiq processing facility in the Khurais oil field in Saudi Arabia with a coordinated salvo of 18 drones and 7 cruise missiles. These facilities were protected by Patriot PAC-2 batteries. The attack was not intercepted. Not a single missile or drone was engaged before impact. The Abqaiq attack destroyed approximately 5% of global daily oil supply in a single morning. This is the choke point made kinetic. The Strait of Hormuz carries 20% of the world's daily oil. Abqaiq processes 60 to 70% of Saudi Arabia's oil before export. The Houthis, using Iranian-provided weapons that cost a fraction of any interceptor, had found and exploited the seam in the Saudi IADS. The lesson Iran drew from that operation is the lesson that shapes everything happening in the Gulf right now. There are 6 pieces of evidence that the single point of failure in America's Gulf defense network has been identified and is being actively exploited. Walk through each one carefully. Number 1, The radar coverage problem is geometric and has not been solved. American air defense radars in the Gulf operate on physics that cannot be negotiated away by any amount of defense budget. A ground-based radar system has a coverage horizon determined by the curvature of the Earth. At low altitudes, below 100 feet, a target can fly within radar detection range that is dramatically compressed compared to a high-altitude target. The terrain in the Gulf region, particularly the shallow coastal areas, the urban canyons of Bahrain and Qatar, and the mountain corridors in Iran's Zagros range, creates natural masking that radar systems cannot see through. Iran knows exactly where these geographic blind spots are. They have been flying reconnaissance drones along these corridors. Some intercepted, some not, for years, okay? This is documented. The geometric limitations of ground-based radar are not classified. The specific gaps in the Gulf network are. But if Iran has been probing those gaps systematically since at least 2019, they have had 7 years to map them with the precision of a locksmith who built the lock himself. Number 2. America's Gulf-based ships carry the most capable naval air defense systems in the world, but they cannot be everywhere simultaneously, and the positioning of those ships is visible to commercial satellite imagery. This is the detail that should be more alarming than it currently is in public discussion. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyers operating in the Gulf carry the AN/Spy-1 or Spy-6 radar systems and SM-6 interceptor missiles. These are extraordinary capabilities. But there are finite numbers of these ships. They require port calls for maintenance and crew rotation, and their positioning in any given 48-hour window is observable by commercial satellite imagery available to any actor with a subscription to Planet Labs or Maxar. Iran does not need to hack classified Navy tracking systems to know where the coverage gaps in ship-based radar fall on any given day. They can buy the satellite imagery, and the positioning patterns driven by logistics, port access, and standard operational rotation cycles are not random. They are predictable. The seam in the network is not a fixed geographic feature. It is a dynamic gap that moves with the ships. Iran has been charting that movement for years. Number 3. The drone swarm problem has fundamentally changed the mathematics of defense saturation, and the Gulf network's interceptor architecture was not designed with mass saturation in mind. This is the direct lesson of the October 2023 Houthi and Iranian drone campaigns. A Shahed-136 loitering munition, the Iranian-designed one-way attack drone that was used extensively in both the Yemen campaign and subsequently in Ukraine, Shakstri, Manouchian, costs approximately $20,000 per unit. A single SM-2 naval interceptor costs approximately $400,000. A Patriot PAC-3 interceptor, as I mentioned in other contexts, runs $4 to $6 million. When Iran or its proxies launches a mixed salvo of 50 drones, some decoys, some live, they are not trying to get all 50 through. They are trying to get 2 or 3 through while exhausting the interceptor magazines of the defending ships and batteries. This is the cost ratio logic applied to the Gulf context with devastating arithmetic clarity. 50 drones at $20,000 each is $1 million. The intercept campaign burns through interceptors at a cost per round that multiples that figure by orders of magnitude. And when the magazines run low, the seam opens. Number 4, the command and control node for American Gulf air defense has a documented geographic concentration problem. The Combined Air Operations Center at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar coordinates American air operations across the entire Central Command area of responsibility, from Egypt to Central Asia. It is the brain of the network, and while it is hardened and defended, it sits at a known fixed location that Iranian ballistic missiles can reach in under 8 minutes from western Iran. The redundancy arrangements for CAOC, what happens if Al Udeid is struck or degraded, are classified, but the vulnerability of a single-node command architecture to a precise, high-speed ballistic missile strike is not a theoretical concern. It is an operational reality that Iranian military planners have included in their targeting matrices since at least 2020, according to unclassified portions of Defense Intelligence Agency annual threat assessments. The single point of failure in America's Gulf defense is not just a coverage gap in the radar network. It is also the cognitive and command gap that opens when the brain of the system is disrupted before the sensors can report what is coming. 3 hours, not 30 ISR. 3 hours would be generous. 8 minutes is what the physics allows. Number 5, Iran's investment in low observable cruise missile technology has specifically targeted the radar seam problem. The Quds-1 cruise missile used in the Abqaiq attack and its successors in the Quds-2 and Quds-4 lineage are not sophisticated stealth aircraft. They are not the F-35, but they do not need to be. They are designed to fly at altitudes and trajectories that minimize their radar cross-section within the specific geometric constraints of the Gulf's radar architecture. This is targeted engineering, not general stealth capability. Iran is not trying to build a missile that is invisible to all radars everywhere. They are building missiles that are optimized for the specific coverage gaps they have spent years mapping in the specific theater where they intend to use them. This is the difference between a locksmith who builds a generic key and one who has spent 7 years studying your specific lock. Iran knows this network the way a locksmith knows a lock he built himself, not by guessing, but by systematic, patient, operationally informed engineering. Number 6, the resupply and maintenance timelines for Gulf-based Patriot batteries create a structural window of reduced readiness that is predictable and exploitable. Patriot batteries require periodic maintenance cycles during which their operational readiness is degraded. The scheduling of these cycles, while classified in specific detail, follows patterns dictated by the standard maintenance schedules published in unclassified Army doctrine. An adversary with sufficient intelligence either signals intelligence, human sources, or simply patient observation of logistics patterns and can then develop a probabilistic picture of when a given battery is most likely to be in a reduced readiness state. This is not a catastrophic vulnerability under normal operational conditions, but combined with the radar coverage gaps, the ship positioning predictability, and the command node concentration problem, it adds one more layer of structural fragility to a network that is being presented publicly as seamless and invulnerable. Seamless and invulnerable. Okay? Let those words sit against the evidence I have just walked you through. Now, the strongest argument against my analysis, the counter-argument made by serious people who have access to classified information I do not have, runs essentially as follows. The public picture of American Gulf air defense is deliberately incomplete because operational security requires it, and the gaps I have identified from open source analysis have already been identified and addressed through classified technical and operational means that I am simply not able to observe. The fact that I can identify a radar seam from commercial satellite imagery and geometric analysis does not mean that seam has not been closed by a classified system whose existence is not publicly acknowledged. Electronic warfare capabilities, cyber means, classified overhead surveillance, and classified point defense systems may have addressed precisely the vulnerabilities I'm describing, and my analysis is simply working from an artificially impoverished information picture. This is a serious point. I cannot disprove it. But here is what that argument cannot explain. It cannot explain why American officials in Bahrain are making public assurances about Gulf defense readiness in the specific, emphatic, and slightly defensive language they are using this week. Confident systems do not require that level of reassurance. It cannot explain why the Abraham Accords normalization process included, as a largely unreported component, significant discussion of integrated air defense networking between Israel and Gulf Arab states, a discussion that would be unnecessary if American capabilities were as comprehensive as advertised. And it cannot explain why the Houthis, armed with Iranian weapons and Iranian targeting intelligence, have continued to successfully strike ships in the Red Sea with a reliability that has directly caused the rerouting of global commercial shipping away from the Suez Corridor. If the IADS were working as described, the Houthis would have run out of lucky shots long ago. They have not run out of lucky shots because they're not taking lucky shots. They are exploiting a documented, persistent structural seam. Let me synthesize everything. The single point of failure in America's Gulf defense is not a single point in the physical sense. It is a systemic fragility arising from the intersection of geometric radar limitations, finite and predictable ship positioning, cost ratio vulnerability to drone saturation, command node geographic concentration, and engineered missile trajectories optimized for the specific gaps in this specific network. Iran has had 7 years since Abqaiq to refine its map of this fragility. The network has been patched and upgraded in the intervening period, but patching a network and eliminating its fundamental architectural constraints are not the same thing. The physics has not changed. The geography has not changed. And Iran's patience, which is the quality that American analysis consistently underestimates, has not changed. The hidden actor benefiting from this situation is not Iran. Iran is the protagonist. The hidden beneficiary is the political framework that allows the American public and the American Congress to believe that the Gulf is adequately defended on the basis of confident public statements by military officials who are operating under significant classification constraints and even more significant institutional incentives not to publicly acknowledge structural vulnerability. The patient giant in this picture is not China, though China is watching carefully. The patient giant is the gap between what is officially stated and what is operationally true, sustained by a classification architecture that serves the purposes of operational security and institutional reassurance simultaneously. That gap is where Iran is operating, and the gap is not closed. 3 things to watch in the next 48 to 72 hours. First, watch whether any American naval assets in the Gulf make unscheduled port calls, which in operational language often signals a readiness posture adjustment following an intelligence assessment. An unscheduled maintenance stop is the fleet telling you, without words, that something in the picture has changed. Second, watch whether Qatar or Bahrain makes any public statements about upgrading their own national air defense capabilities. Host nation confidence in the American umbrella shows up in procurement decisions first. Third, watch whether commercial shipping insurance rates in the Gulf, specifically Lloyd's of London war risk surcharges for the Strait of Hormuz corridor, move in the next week. The insurance market has access to risk models that are not driven by official reassurance. And when the rates move, the market is telling you what the official briefings are not. Your homework is 2 documents. First, read the unclassified summary of the 2019 Abqaiq attack released by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, paying specific attention to the section on why warning systems failed to provide actionable intercept time. Then read the International Institute for Strategic Studies 2024 Military Balance chapter on Gulf Air Defense Architecture. Put those 2 documents side by side and ask yourself whether the structural conditions that produced the Abqaiq failure have been genuinely remediated or merely managed. If you think I have the vulnerability picture wrong, if you have sources that demonstrate the radar seams I described have been closed by technical means I cannot observe, prove that in the comments. I want to be shown the evidence that makes this less alarming, because right now the evidence I can access points in one direction only. Here's the philosophical question I want to leave you with. When a military power publicly guarantees the safety of its forces in a theater while simultaneously operating under classification constraints that prevent any honest public accounting of whether that guarantee is defensible, who exactly is that guarantee being made for? For the forces? For the adversary, for the domestic political audience? And if the single point of failure in the network is eventually exploited, which of those audiences will have been most dangerously misled? I will see you in the next one. Let me add the layer that completes this picture, because there is a dimension of the single point of failure problem that I have not yet addressed, and that I think is the most strategically consequential piece of the entire analysis. The vulnerability I have described is a technical and operational vulnerability. Radar gaps, ship positioning, drone saturation math. But there is a parallel political vulnerability that amplifies every technical weakness by an order of magnitude. The American military presence in the Gulf is sustained by a set of basing agreements with Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. These agreements are not treaties in the constitutional sense. They are executive arrangements subject to renegotiation, and the host nations that host American forces do so on the basis of a calculated assessment that the American security umbrella makes them safer than they would be without it. The moment any of those governments begins to privately doubt that calculation, the moment the cost ratio math I have described today begins to penetrate the strategic councils in Doha or Manama, the political foundation of the entire Gulf defense architecture begins to move. Not crack, move. And Iran knows this. Iran has always known this. The technical exploitation of the radar seam is designed not just to get missiles through a defense network. It is designed to make Gulf governments governments quietly question whether the network they are hosting is actually protecting them or simply making them a target. That is the single point of failure that no amount of PAC-3 interceptors can close. It is a political geometry, and it is precisely where Iran is applying pressure with the greatest patience and the greatest precision. And there's one more element I want you to carry out of this analysis: the timing of Iran's capability demonstrations, the specific choice of when to make its mapping of American radar gaps known, whether through proxy action or through signals that end up in Western intelligence assessments that then end up in outlet reports, is not accidental. Iran times its most consequential intelligence revelations to moments of maximum American political distraction. When Washington is consumed by domestic political cycles, when Congress is in the middle of a budget fight, when the president is managing a simultaneous crisis in another theater, that is when Iran tends to move the pieces on the Gulf board with the most deliberate subtlety. This is not paranoia. This is the documented operational pattern of the last 15 years of Iranian strategic behavior. The single point of failure in America's Gulf defense is not just technical, it is temporal. It is about the gap between when Iran chooses to act and when America is best positioned to respond. And in that gap, in that perfectly chosen window of American institutional distraction, is where the most important decisions about Gulf security are quietly, invisibly, and irreversibly being made. The question is not whether America can close the radar seam. The question is whether it will close it before Iran decides the window is open enough to use it. One final observation before we close. The reason the single point of failure in America's Gulf defense has not generated the level of public debate it deserves is itself a revealing piece of analysis. The American defense community operates within an institutional culture that strongly discourages public acknowledgement of structural vulnerability. Not because the officials are dishonest, most of them are not, but because the incentive architecture of the system rewards confident public posture over honest public accounting. A general who publicly identifies a critical vulnerability in a defended theater faces immediate questions about whether he is undermining deterrence, signaling weakness to adversaries, or creating a political problem for his chain of command. A general who makes confident public statements about readiness and is later proven wrong by an adversary action faces a very different and institutionally less costly set of consequences. This is the organizational equivalent of the McNamara fallacy. The system measures and rewards what can be stated confidently, and it discounts or suppresses what cannot. The single point of failure persists not primarily because it cannot be fixed, but because the institutional architecture of the system is not well designed to generate the honest internal pressure required to fix it before an adversary exploits it. And that ultimately is the most alarming finding of this entire analysis.